My name is Michael Thompson, but in here I was Ghost. Not because I could disappear. Hell, nobody disappears from a maximum security federal penitentiary. I got that name because I learned early that in these concrete tombs, the best way to stay alive is to move like a shadow, speak like a whisper, and remember everything while pretending you saw nothing. I spent 8 years walking the yards of USP Florence, Colorado. 8 years watching good men turn into monsters and monsters pretend to be saints. 8 years as a Peckerwood, a white prison gang that preaches brotherhood but practices betrayal like it's a goddamn art form. You want to know what it's really like in here? Forget what you've seen in movies. This ain't about tough guys flexing muscles or dramatic confrontations in the chow hall. Real prison is about silence. It's about the conversations that happen in whispers during yard time, the glances that last half a second too long, and the way a man's breathing changes when he knows he's been marked for death. I came in on a 15-year stretch for armed robbery. Stupid kid stuff. Knocked over 3 gas stations in Phoenix with my cousin Danny. But stupid don't keep you warm at night when you're surrounded by lifers, gang leaders, and men who've got nothing left to lose. So I found protection the only way a white boy could in federal lockup. I joined the Woods. Marcus Diesel Kowalski ran our crew. Polish-American from Detroit, built like a brick shithouse, with swastika tattoos covering his arms and a reputation for keeping order through fear. Diesel had been down for 12 years on a murder rap, and he understood one thing better than anyone. In prison, loyalty isn't about friendship, it's about survival economics. Ghost, he told me during my second week as we stood in the corner of the weight pit, you got 2 choices in here. You can be prey or you can be predator. But if you choose predator, you better understand the rules. Rule number 1, the Woods come before everything. Your family, your conscience, your God, everything. I nodded like I understood, but I didn't. Not then. Rule number 2, Diesel continued, his voice dropping to that prison whisper that carries just far enough. Trust nobody completely. Not even me. Because the moment you let your guard down, the moment you think someone's got your back, no questions asked, that's when you'll find a shank between your ribs. He wasn't being dramatic. He was being practical. Because in the world of the Peckerwoods, brotherhood was a business arrangement, and business arrangements can always be renegotiated. The first betrayal I witnessed happened 3 months after I patched in. Tommy Brennan, a young kid from Boston who'd been running with us for about 6 months, made the mistake of talking too freely with a guard named Rodriguez. Nothing major, just asked about getting moved to a different cell block because his cellie was making his life hell. But Rodriguez was known to feed information back to the administration, and the administration had been cracking down on gang activity. Word got back to Diesel that Tommy might be talking. Not snitching exactly, but talking. In the Woods, there's no difference. I remember the meeting in Diesel's cell. Just 5 of us, the inner circle. Diesel, me, Big Jim Morrison, no relation to the singer, Carl Razor Martinez, and Joey Torino. We sat on the floor in a circle, speaking in those prison whispers while Diesel's cellie pretended to read a magazine. The kid's a liability, Diesel said, his pale blue eyes scanning each of our faces. Question is, what do we do about it? Maybe we just talk to him, I suggested. I was still new, still thinking like a civilian. Warn him off, Big Jim snorted. He was a lifer from Alabama, in for killing 3 people during a meth deal gone wrong. Talk don't work, Ghost. Talk just lets him know we're watching, gives him time to make his move. What move? I asked. He's not a snitch. He's just scared. Razor leaned forward. He got his nickname from the scars covering his face. Souvenirs from a yard fight 5 years earlier. Scared people do stupid things. And stupid things get us all locked down, get our privileges taken away, get us transferred to different yards where we start over with nothing. Diesel held up a hand for silence. It's decided. Tommy goes. Question is, how? They talked about it like they were planning a birthday party. Who would do it, Big Jim? Where it would happen, the laundry room during evening shift? How it would look? Accident, slip and fall, head hits the concrete floor just wrong. I sat there listening to them plan a murder and realized I was past the point of no return. Tommy Brennan died on a Tuesday evening, slipped on a wet floor in the laundry room, they said. Hit his head on the corner of an industrial washing machine, internal bleeding, tragic accident. I was the one who mopped up his blood. That night, lying in my cell, I understood what Diesel meant about trust. Because every single one of us in that meeting knew that if circumstances were different, if it served the group's interests, we'd plan each other's deaths with the same cold calculation. The thing about betrayal in prison is that it's never personal. It's survival math. And in the mathematics of survival, every relationship is conditional, every alliance temporary, and every act of loyalty is just an investment you hope will pay dividends when your own number comes up. But I learned something else that night, something Diesel didn't teach me. In a world where everyone is expendable, the smart move isn't to trust nobody. The smart move is to make yourself too valuable to kill. That's when I became Ghost for real. Information in prison flows like water. It finds every crack, seeps through every barrier, and eventually reaches places you never expected. The difference is that prison water is poisoned, and every drop carries the potential to kill. I became a collector. It started small. I'd listen during chow time, pick up fragments of conversations, who was having problems with their cellie, which guards were taking bribes, what gangs were planning moves against each other. At first I kept it to myself, just survival intelligence, knowing which way the wind was blowing so I could stay out of the storm. But Diesel noticed. He always noticed. "You hear things, Ghost," he said one day as we walked laps around the yard. The autumn sun was weak through the razor wire, casting everything in that grey light that made the place look even more like hell than usual. "Word is you got good ears." I shrugged. "I listen." "Don't mean much." "Everything means much in here," Diesel replied. "Question is what you doing with what you hear." That was my invitation to move up in the organization. In the Peckerwoods, information was currency, and Diesel was always looking for brokers he could trust, or at least brokers he could control. So I became his intelligence network. I'd cultivate sources, inmates who owed favors, guards who needed cigarettes or magazines, trustees who moved between cell blocks. I'd piece together patterns, connect dots that other people missed, and slowly I became indispensable. The first major score came 6 months later. I'd been hearing rumors about a hit being planned by the Mexican mafia, La M.A., against one of our allies, a white gang called the Brand. Nothing concrete, just whispers and half conversations in Spanish that I picked up from my job in the kitchen. But I'd also noticed movement patterns, certain EMA members showing up in places they normally didn't go, guards being rotated off shifts unexpectedly. Small things that didn't mean anything individually but painted a picture when you put them together. I brought it to Diesel during a poker game in the rec room. Cards were our cover. Hard to bug a moving game, easy to have a conversation that looked casual. "They're moving tomorrow," I told him, pretending to study my hand. "During shift change at 3 p.m. Target's going to be walking from the law library back to his block." Diesel's face didn't change, but I saw him process the information. "You sure?" "Sure enough to bet my life on it," I said. And I meant it. Because if I was wrong, if Diesel acted on bad intel, I'd be held responsible. In the woods, being wrong wasn't just embarrassing, it was fatal. The hit never happened. Word got back to the Brand. They changed their guy's routine and La M had to scrap their plan. But more importantly, the Brand owed us a favor. And favors in prison are worth more than money, more than drugs, more than anything else you can trade. That's when I understood the real power structure in federal lockup. It wasn't about who could fight the best or who had the most impressive reputation on the streets. It was about who controlled the flow of information. And information control meant you could predict moves before they happened, prevent conflicts before they started, and position yourself to profit from chaos while everyone else was just trying to survive it. But with power comes responsibility, and with responsibility comes risk. The first time I had to make a choice between loyalty and survival, it involved a guard named Patterson. White guy, about 45, worked the evening shift in C Block. Patterson had a gambling problem, football mostly, but also horses, basketball, anything with odds attached to it. He owed money to some very unfriendly people on the outside, and he'd started bringing contraband into the prison to pay his debts. Nothing major at first. Cigarettes, magazines, candy bars, but gradually, Patterson got pulled deeper. He started moving drugs, then weapons. Eventually, he was facilitating communications between gang leaders and their outside connections, a federal crime that would have added decades to his already risky lifestyle. I knew about Patterson because I made it my business to know about every guard who might be useful. But I wasn't the only one watching him. Agent Sarah Chen from Internal Affairs had been investigating corruption at Florence for 6 months. She was smart, patient, and thorough. Everything that made dirty guards nervous and clean inmates worried about collateral damage. Chen was building a case against Patterson, but she needed evidence that would hold up in court. She approached me during a random interview, ostensibly asking about an unrelated incident from the previous month, but I could tell she was fishing for information about Patterson, testing what I might know, seeing if I could be turned into an asset. The smart play would have been to tell Diesel immediately. Gang leaders need to know when federal agents are sniffing around, need to know which of their people might be compromised. But I had a problem. If I told Diesel about Chen's investigation, he'd shut down Patterson's operation immediately. And shutting down Patterson meant losing a valuable resource that had been supplying the Woods with intelligence and contraband for months. More importantly, if Chen's investigation went forward, Patterson would eventually get arrested. When dirty guards get arrested, they talk. And when they talk, they trade names for reduced sentences. Patterson knew things about the Woods that could get people killed, including me. So I made a choice that probably saved my life, but definitely cost someone else theirs. I fed Chen just enough information to help her build her case against Patterson, but I did it in a way that looked like cooperation rather than betrayal. I told her about contraband I'd observed other inmates possessing, contraband that could only have come through a guard connection. I mentioned conversations I'd overheard about guard corruption in general terms. I gave her pieces of a puzzle she was already putting together, just helped her fill in some blanks. 3 weeks later, Patterson got arrested during a shift change. They found drugs in his locker, recorded phone calls on his personal cell, and financial records that tied him to outside criminal organizations. Open and shut case. But here's what Chen didn't know, and what I couldn't tell her. Patterson's arrest created a power vacuum. The contraband pipeline he'd been running didn't just disappear. It got absorbed by other corrupt guards who were smarter about covering their tracks. And those guards owed their expanded territories to the Woods, because we'd been the ones to feed information about Patterson to the feds. Diesel never knew I'd talked to Agent Chen. As far as he was concerned, Patterson got sloppy and got caught, and we'd managed to avoid getting pulled into the investigation. But I knew the truth. I'd orchestrated the whole thing, manipulated both sides to benefit our organization while eliminating a potential threat to my own survival. That's when I understood the real nature of betrayal in prison. It's not about breaking promises or abandoning loyalty. It's about managing information to maximize your own survival odds, even when that means other people don't survive at all. The thing is, once you cross that line, once you prove to yourself that you're willing to sacrifice anyone for your own benefit, you can never go back. Because every relationship becomes transactional, every conversation becomes strategy, and every act of kindness becomes a calculated investment. I was becoming exactly the kind of person I'd been afraid of when I first walked through those gates. But I was alive, and Tommy Brennan wasn't, and Patterson was doing 25 to life in a different federal facility. In prison mathematics, that's what success looks like. The thing about prison gangs is that they're built on a contradiction. They preach loyalty while practicing paranoia, demand brotherhood while rewarding treachery. The moment you join, you're both protected and endangered by the same people, often at the same time. By my 4th year in Florence, I'd worked my way up to become Diesel's right hand. I knew which guards could be bought, which inmates were planning moves against us, and which of our own people might be having second thoughts about their commitment to the Woods. I'd prevented 3 hits against our members, orchestrated 2 successful retaliation strikes, and helped expand our influence into 2 additional cell blocks. But success in prison is like success anywhere else. It makes you enemies, including enemies you never saw coming. The betrayal that almost killed me came from someone I'd trusted with my life, Big Jim Morrison. Jim had been my mentor since my 2nd month inside. He'd taught me how to fight with improvised weapons, how to spot trouble before it found me, and how to read the subtle signals that governed prison's social dynamics. He'd stood with me during my first real test, a confrontation with some Aryan Brotherhood members who thought they could muscle in on Woods territory, and he'd covered my back during the retaliation that followed. More than that, Jim had become something like a friend. We'd spend hours talking during yard time, sharing stories about our lives before prison, making plans for what we'd do when we got out. He was one of the few people in Florence who felt real to me. who seemed to exist as more than just a survival resource or potential threat. That should have been my first warning sign. In prison, friendship is a luxury you can't afford. The setup began with a seemingly routine request. La MA had been encroaching on our drug territory for months, testing boundaries, seeing how much they could take before we pushed back. Diesel decided it was time to send a message, a demonstration that would remind everyone why the Woods controlled 3 cell blocks and most of the profitable contraband trade. The target was Carlos Mendez, a Madoka, mid-level EMI lieutenant, who'd been particularly aggressive about challenging our operations. The plan was simple: shank him during the evening recreation period, make it look like a random yard fight. Let word spread that disrespecting the Woods came with consequences. Jim volunteered for the job, said he owed Mendez for some disrespect from the previous month, wanted to handle it personally. Diesel agreed. Jim was reliable, experienced, and angry enough to do it right. But there was a problem. I didn't see coming. Jim had his own relationship with Agent Chen. I found out later that Chen had been working him for almost a year, ever since Patterson's arrest. She'd identified Jim as someone with detailed knowledge of Woods operations, someone who might be persuaded to cooperate in exchange for consideration during his eventual parole hearing. And she'd been patient, building trust, offering small favors, waiting for the right moment to make her pitch. The Mendez hit was that moment. Chen couldn't prevent the attack directly. That would have blown Jim's cover and probably gotten him killed. But she could manipulate the circumstances to ensure it failed, and she could use that failure to justify a major crackdown on gang activity at Florence. Here's what happened. Jim went after Mendez as planned during evening rec in the yard, but instead of the quick, clean kill we'd orchestrated, Mendez was ready for him. Ready with backup, ready with weapons, ready with knowledge of exactly when and where the attack would come. The fight turned into a full-scale riot. 23 inmates were injured, 2 guards were hospitalized, and the entire facility went into lockdown for 6 weeks. When it was over, Jim was dead, killed not by La M, but by one of our own guys who thought Jim had screwed up the operation through incompetence. And Diesel was transferred to ADX Florence, the Supermax facility next door, where inmates spend 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. And gang activity is nearly impossible. I didn't understand what had really happened until months later, when I pieced together the timeline from conversations with other inmates, observations about guard rotations, and small inconsistencies in the official reports. By then, Chen had been promoted and transferred to a different facility, and the Woods at Florence had been broken up and scattered across the federal system. But here's the part that still keeps me awake some nights. I think Jim tried to warn me. 3 days before the Mendez hit, he'd approached me during chow time with what seemed like casual conversation. We talked about the operation, went over the details one more time, discussed contingencies, normal pre-mission planning. But at the end of the conversation, Jim said something that didn't make sense at the time. "Ghost, if something goes wrong with this thing, if it turns into more than we bargained for, you make sure you're nowhere near the yard when it happens. You got too much value to risk on a routine operation." I thought he was just being protective, brotherly concern from a veteran to a younger gang member. But looking back, I think he was trying to tell me that he knew the operation was compromised, that he was walking into a setup and that I should stay clear of the fallout. Jim died protecting a secret that would have gotten him killed anyway if it had been discovered. He chose to go down fighting rather than live with the knowledge that he'd betrayed everyone who'd trusted him. In a weird way, that was the most loyal thing anyone had ever done for me, dying to prevent me from learning something that would have forced me to kill him myself. After the riot and the transfers and the lockdown, Florence was a different place. New administration, new guards, new rules. The old power structures had been dismantled and everyone was starting over from zero. Some guys saw it as an opportunity. Fresh start, clean slate, chance to maybe find a different way to do their time. Me, I saw it as a reminder of what happens when you trust anyone completely. Because here's what I learned from Jim's betrayal. In prison, everyone is simultaneously your brother and your enemy, often in the same moment. The same person who would die for you today might sell you out tomorrow, not because they're evil, but because circumstances change and survival calculations get readjusted. The smart move isn't to avoid betrayal. Betrayal is inevitable. The smart move is to position yourself so that when it comes, you survive it. Jim taught me that lesson with his life. I've been applying it ever since. Getting out of prison doesn't mean you're free. It just means you carry the bars with you everywhere you go. I walked out of Florence after serving 11 years of my 15-year sentence. Got 4 years knocked off for good behavior and program completion. The sun hurt my eyes. The traffic noise made me jump, and I spent my first night of freedom, sleeping on the floor of my halfway house room because the bed felt too soft. But the hardest part wasn't adjusting to civilian life. The hardest part was living with what I knew. You spend a decade in federal lockup. You accumulate secrets like radiation, invisible, permanent, and potentially lethal to everyone around you. I knew which guards were dirty, which inmates were informants, which gang leaders had made deals with federal prosecutors. I knew about murders that were never solved, conspiracies that were never uncovered, and betrayals that were never acknowledged. Most dangerous of all, I knew about the people who were still inside, still playing the same games, still making the same calculations about loyalty and survival that I'd learned to navigate, and some of them knew that I knew. The first contact came 6 weeks after my release. I was working construction in Denver, hard labor that kept my hands busy and my mind occupied, when I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. "Ghost," the voice said. I hadn't heard that name in 8 months, but I recognized the speaker immediately. Reza Martinez. He'd been transferred to a different facility after the riot, but apparently he'd found his way to a phone and my parole officer's contact information. "That's not my name anymore," I told him. "Sure it is," Reza replied. "Names like that, they stick with you. Question is, you remember your friends?" It wasn't really a question. It was a reminder of obligations that didn't end just because I'd served my time. In the gang world, membership is permanent, and debts follow you wherever you go. Reza needed a favor. His brother Miguel was facing federal drug charges in Colorado, and the family needed someone to carry messages between Miguel and his lawyers, messages that couldn't be trusted to phones or mail or any other method the feds might be monitoring. "Simple courier work," Reza explained. "You just drive from Denver to Pueblo, meet with Miguel's lawyer, pass along some information. Nothing illegal, nothing that violates your parole. Just helping out a brother's family during a hard time." I knew it wasn't that simple. It never is. But I also knew that refusing would mark me as someone who'd abandoned his obligations, who might not be trustworthy with other secrets, who might need to be reminded of his loyalties in more direct ways. So I took the job. Drove to Pueblo, met with Miguel's lawyer, a nervous white guy named Davidson, who looked like he'd rather be handling corporate mergers than drug cases, and delivered Reza's message. The message was coordinates, GPS coordinates for a location in the Colorado mountains where Miguel's organization had buried product and money before his arrest. Information that Davidson needed to negotiate a plea deal that would keep Miguel from spending the rest of his life in federal lockup. I realized 2 things during that drive back to Denver. First, I was already sliding back into the criminal world I'd tried to leave behind, not because I wanted to, but because the skills and connections I'd developed in prison made me valuable to people who lived outside the law. Second, and more troubling, I was good at it, better than I'd been at anything in civilian life. Over the following months, the requests kept coming. Information brokerage mostly, using my knowledge of federal prison systems to help lawyers understand how their clients were likely to be treated, what deals might be available, which facilities offered the best programs for rehabilitation or sentence reduction. Nothing that technically violated my parole, but everything that kept me connected to the criminal world I was supposed to be leaving behind. The work paid well, better than construction, and it felt familiar, comfortable in a way that civilian life never did. I understood the rules, knew how to read people, could anticipate problems before they developed. I was using the same skills that had kept me alive in prison, applying them in the outside world where the stakes seemed lower but the principles remained identical. But comfort is dangerous when you're trying to build a legitimate life, because the more comfortable you get with criminal activity, the easier it becomes to justify the next step and the next step after that. The line I crossed was helping Tommy Rivera. Rivera was a former Peckerwood who'd gotten out 6 months before me. He'd been trying to go straight, job at an auto shop, small apartment in Aurora, regular check-ins with his parole officer. But Rivera had a problem. His former gang was demanding payment on old debts, and his legitimate income wasn't enough to cover what he owed. Rivera contacted me through mutual connections. asked if I knew anyone who might be willing to buy information about federal prison operations. He had detailed knowledge about guard rotations, contraband smuggling routes, and inmate vulnerabilities at 3 different facilities. Information that would be valuable to criminal organizations trying to get messages or products to their incarcerated members. The smart move would have been to tell Rivera to talk to his parole officer, maybe get relocated to a different city where his past couldn't find him. But Rivera was desperate, and desperate people make poor decisions that can endanger everyone around them. So I helped him find a buyer, a lawyer who represented multiple gang leaders, who needed current intelligence about federal facilities to help his clients navigate their sentences more successfully. The transaction was clean. Rivera provided information, the lawyer provided payment, and everyone maintained plausible deniability about the ultimate use of that intelligence. 3 weeks later, Rivera was dead, shot twice in the head outside his apartment building, execution style, by someone who knew his schedule and his routines. I never found out whether he was killed by his former gang for talking to outsiders, or by someone who'd bought his information and wanted to eliminate the source, or by completely unrelated criminals who saw him as an easy target. In the world Rivera and I inhabited, the motive didn't matter as much as the message. This is what happens when you try to profit from secrets that don't belong to you. Rivera's death forced me to confront a reality I'd been avoiding since my release. I wasn't transitioning from criminal to civilian. I was just changing the nature of my criminal activity. I was still making survival calculations based on loyalty and betrayal, still treating relationships as transactions, still living in a world where information was currency and trust was a luxury that could get you killed. The difference was that in prison everyone understood the rules. Everyone knew they were living in a predatory environment where the strong survived by exploiting the weak, where loyalty was conditional and betrayal was survival strategy. Outside, most people operated under different assumptions about human nature and social cooperation, assumptions that made them vulnerable to people like me who'd learned to think differently. I could continue down that path. I had the skills, the connections, and the reputation to build a successful criminal career in the information trade. I could leverage my prison experience into steady income, protect myself with the same paranoia and calculation that had kept me alive in federal lockup, and probably live comfortably for years before law enforcement caught up with me. Or I could try something different, something that didn't require me to treat every human interaction as a potential threat or opportunity for exploitation. The choice wasn't between good and evil. Those concepts had lost most of their meaning during my time inside. The choice was between familiar and unknown, between comfortable and challenging, between the person I'd become and the person I might still be able to be. I chose unknown. I disappeared, changed my name legally, moved to a different state, cut contact with everyone from my previous life. I found work that didn't require background checks, lived in places where nobody asked questions about your past, and slowly learned how to interact with people who assumed basic honesty and decency until proven otherwise. It took years to retrain my instincts, to stop analyzing every conversation for hidden meanings, to trust that most people weren't calculating the best way to exploit or eliminate me. Some days I still catch myself thinking like Ghost, evaluating threats, identifying opportunities, planning for betrayals that probably aren't coming. But I'm trying to be someone else now. Someone whose survival doesn't depend on other people's destruction, whose success doesn't require keeping dangerous secrets, whose relationships aren't based on mutual fear and calculated advantage. The person I am now doesn't have a prison nickname. He doesn't know which guards can be bribed or which inmates are planning to kill each other. He's never orchestrated a betrayal or cleaned blood off a laundry room floor. That person is boring and ordinary and completely unremarkable. And after 11 years of being Ghost, boring and ordinary feels like the most radical thing I've ever attempted. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I still remember the weight of secrets that could destroy lives. I still think about the people who trusted me with their survival, and the people whose survival I traded away for my own benefit. Prison doesn't end when you walk out the gates. It ends when you stop thinking like a prisoner, stop treating the world as a place where everyone is either predator or prey. I'm still working on that part. Author's note: this story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. The narrative is intended to explore themes of survival, loyalty, and moral compromise, within the context of the American prison system, not to glorify criminal activity or gang membership.